Welcome back to Second Chance Histories, where we explore the extraordinary lives hidden behind ordinary facades and reveal how some of the most profound impact on the world comes from people who never seek recognition, never ask for credit, and spend decades quietly changing lives while remaining completely invisible to public attention. Today's story takes us to the headquarters of Midwest Insurance Company in Cleveland, Ohio, where 64-year-old administrative assistant Margaret Walsh worked in the same cubicle for 30 years, processing paperwork with meticulous care and speaking so rarely that most colleagues barely knew her name. But when Margaret died suddenly of a heart attack, what emerged from her personal effects would shock an entire company and reveal that the quietest person in the office had been living the most extraordinary secret life of service to others. This is the story of The Silent Guardian, where one woman's death became the revelation of 3 decades of anonymous generosity that had quietly transformed thousands of lives while she remained completely hidden in plain sight. Margaret Rose Walsh had occupied Desk 47B in the Claims Processing Department of Midwest Insurance Company for exactly 30 years, 2 months, and 16 days when she suffered a fatal heart attack during her lunch break on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2019. At 64, Margaret was the kind of employee that managers valued but colleagues rarely noticed: punctual, accurate, dependable, and so quietly efficient that her work seemed to happen automatically without drawing any attention to herself. "Margaret was the most reliable person in our department," said her supervisor, Robert Martinez. "She never missed deadlines, never made errors, never caused problems. But she was also incredibly private. In 30 years, I don't think I ever had a personal conversation with her that lasted more than 2 minutes." Margaret's colleagues knew almost nothing about her personal life. She ate lunch alone at her desk, rarely participated in office conversations, and politely declined invitations to company social events. She seemed content with her solitary routine and appeared to have no close relationships within the office. "We used to joke that Margaret was like a ghost who processed insurance claims," admitted Jennifer Rodriguez, who had worked near Margaret for 15 years. "She was always there, always working, but she never really seemed present in the way other people are. We respected her work, but we didn't know her as a person." What none of Margaret's colleagues realized was that her quiet demeanor and preference for solitude had allowed her to dedicate virtually every moment of her life outside the office to an extraordinary secret mission of helping others, a mission so comprehensive and systematic that it had touched thousands of lives over 3 decades. When Margaret died with no immediate family to claim her belongings, the responsibility fell to Human Resources Manager Patricia Chin to sort through Margaret's personal effects and arrange for their disposal or donation. Patricia expected to find the typical contents of a long-term employee's workspace: personal photos, small mementos, maybe some books or hobby materials. Instead, she discovered something that would change everything she thought she knew about the quiet woman who had worked anonymously in the company for 3 decades. Margaret's desk drawers were filled with meticulously organized files containing detailed information about hundreds of individuals and families, their names, addresses, personal circumstances, and specific needs they were facing. The files were updated regularly in Margaret's precise handwriting, with notes about assistance provided, follow-up actions needed, and outcomes achieved. "I found files on families facing eviction, single mothers struggling to pay medical bills, elderly people who couldn't afford prescriptions, college students who needed help with tuition," Patricia recalled. Each file contained evidence that Margaret had been providing financial assistance, but there was no indication of where this help was coming from or how she was coordinating these efforts. Patricia also discovered a sophisticated tracking system that Margaret had developed to monitor the long-term progress of people she had helped. Some files dated back 25 years, with detailed records of how initial assistance had led to sustained improvements in people's lives. Further investigation into Margaret's personal effects revealed the scope of her secret generosity. Patricia found bank records showing that Margaret had been systematically donating 80% of her salary to help individuals and families in crisis, keeping only enough for her own minimal living expenses. Margaret was living on approximately $800 per month while earning $4,200, Patricia discovered. She had no car, lived in a tiny studio apartment, wore the same clothes for years, and ate simple meals so she could give away nearly $3,400 every month to help other people. The bank records showed a pattern of assistance that had continued steadily for 30 years. Margaret had helped pay rent for families facing eviction, covered medical expenses for people without insurance, provided college tuition assistance for promising students from low-income families, and offered emergency financial help to people facing unexpected crises. But most remarkably, Margaret's giving wasn't random or impulsive. She had developed a systematic approach to identifying people who needed help and providing assistance in ways that created lasting positive change rather than just temporary relief. As Patricia continued to investigate Margaret's secret life of service, she discovered that the quiet office worker had built an entire network of connections throughout Cleveland dedicated to helping people in need. Margaret had developed relationships with social workers, teachers, clergy members, medical professionals, and community organization leaders who helped her identify families and individuals who were struggling with financial hardships. Margaret had created her own private social services agency, Patricia realized. She was receiving referrals from schools about students who couldn't afford school supplies, from hospitals about patients who couldn't pay for treatments, from churches about families facing evictions. She had somehow become the hidden safety net for hundreds of people throughout the city. Margaret's approach was remarkably sophisticated. She didn't just provide emergency assistance, she invested in long-term solutions. She would pay for job training programs that enabled people to become self-sufficient, cover educational expenses that opened career opportunities, and provide business startup funding that allowed people to create their own income sources. Patricia shared her discoveries with Margaret's supervisor, Robert Martinez, and together they decided to contact some of the people mentioned in Margaret's files to better understand the scope of her impact. What they learned exceeded their most extraordinary expectations. Dr. Michael Thompson, now a successful physician at Cleveland Clinic, had been a struggling pre-med student 20 years earlier when Margaret anonymously paid his final year of medical school tuition after learning through a university counselor that he was about to drop out due to financial hardship. "I never knew who paid for my education," Dr. Thompson explained when contacted by Patricia. "I received a letter saying that an anonymous benefactor had covered my tuition and expenses for senior year. I was told only that someone believed in my potential to help people as a doctor. That anonymous gift made my entire career possible." Sarah Martinez, now a successful attorney and single mother, had been facing eviction with her 3 young children 15 years earlier when Margaret anonymously paid 6 months of rent to give Sarah time to complete her paralegal certification program. "Someone I never met saved my family," Sarah said through tears. "We were 2 days away from being homeless when our landlord told us the rent had been paid by someone who wanted to help us get back on our feet. That gift allowed me to finish my training program, get a stable job, and eventually put myself through law school." As Patricia and Robert continued contacting people from Margaret's files, an extraordinary pattern emerged. Margaret hadn't just helped individuals. She had systematically invested in people whose success would create expanding networks of positive impact throughout their communities. James Patterson, who had received business startup funding from Margaret 12 years earlier, now employed 47 people in his construction company and had established a scholarship program that helped other entrepreneurs launch their businesses. "Margaret gave me $5,000 to start my construction company when no bank would approve my loan application," James explained. That investment didn't just change my life. It created jobs for dozens of people and allowed me to help other people start their own businesses. Margaret's $5,000 investment has probably generated over $2 million in economic activity over the past 12 years. Lisa Chen, who had received educational assistance from Margaret 18 years earlier, had become a teacher and then a principal, dedicating her career to helping at-risk students succeed academically. She had personally helped over 300 students graduate from high school and pursue post-secondary education. Margaret paid for my teaching certification when I couldn't afford it, Lisa said. I've spent 18 years trying to pass on the gift she gave me by helping students who face the same financial barriers I did. Every student I've helped graduate is part of Margaret's legacy. Margaret's files revealed that her assistance wasn't randomly distributed, it was strategically planned to create maximum positive impact. She had developed criteria for selecting people to help, focusing on individuals who demonstrated strong motivation to improve their circumstances but lacked only the financial resources to achieve their goals. Margaret was essentially running a private foundation with herself as the sole donor and administrator, Patricia realized. She had created application processes, evaluation criteria, and follow-up systems that would have impressed professional philanthropists. Margaret had also developed relationships with educational institutions, job training programs, and business development organizations that helped her identify the most effective ways to invest in people's futures. She wasn't just giving people money, observed Dr. Patricia Williams, a social work professor at Case Western Reserve University who had unknowingly worked with Margaret for years through referrals. She was providing strategic investments that addressed root causes of financial hardship rather than just symptoms. As the investigation into Margaret's secret life continued, the full extent of her personal sacrifices became clear. She had lived an extremely austere lifestyle for 30 years in order to maximize her ability to help others. Margaret's landlord revealed that she had lived in the same tiny studio apartment for 28 years, never requesting improvements or complaining about the minimal amenities. Her rent payments were always punctual, and she never caused any problems or made any demands. Margaret was the ideal tenant, said landlord David Rodriguez. She was so quiet that I sometimes forgot she lived there. She never asked for anything, never requested repairs unless something was completely broken. I had no idea she was choosing to live so simply so she could help other people. Margaret's few neighbors described her as polite but private, someone who kept to herself but was always willing to help if asked. She had no car, no television, no expensive possessions, and appeared to have no hobbies or recreational activities that cost money. Perhaps the most touching discovery in Margaret's personal effects was a collection of thank you letters and updates from people she had helped over the years. Margaret had kept every note, every graduation announcement, every wedding invitation, and every birth announcement from families whose lives she had touched. Margaret had created a private museum of other people's success stories, Patricia observed. She had boxes of photographs of children she had helped put through school, wedding pictures from couples whose marriages were saved by her assistance, business opening announcements from entrepreneurs she had funded. She was living vicariously through the happiness and success of the people she helped. The letters revealed that many recipients had tried to thank Margaret directly, but she had always maintained her anonymity. People wrote to post office boxes, sent letters through intermediaries, or addressed their thanks to the anonymous helper who had changed their lives. But Margaret had saved every expression of gratitude and had clearly found deep satisfaction in knowing that her sacrifices had created lasting positive change in other people's lives. When Patricia and Robert presented their findings to Midwest Insurance Company's executive leadership, the company faced an unprecedented situation, discovering that their most unassuming employee had been living one of the most extraordinary lives of service they had ever encountered. CEO Jennifer Martinez announced that the company would establish the Margaret Walsh Foundation in honor of their remarkable colleague, with initial funding of $100,000 and a commitment to match employee donations dollar for dollar. Margaret showed us what true leadership looks like, CEO Martinez said during the foundation's launch announcement. She didn't need a title, recognition, or public attention to make an extraordinary difference in the world. She simply saw people in need and dedicated her life to helping them succeed. The company also implemented the Margaret Walsh Award, recognizing employees who demonstrate exceptional service to their communities while maintaining the humility and dedication that characterized Margaret's approach to helping others. News of Margaret's secret life of service spread throughout Cleveland, inspiring community-wide recognition of the impact one person could have through sustained, anonymous generosity. Mayor Patricia Santos proclaimed October 15th as Margaret Walsh Day, encouraging all citizens to perform acts of anonymous kindness in honor of the quiet woman who had helped thousands of people over 3 decades. Margaret Walsh represents the best of what community service can be, Mayor Santos said. She reminds us that the most profound impact often comes from people who serve quietly, without recognition, motivated only by love for their fellow human beings. Cleveland State University established the Margaret Walsh Scholarship for students pursuing careers in social work, education, and community service. The scholarship specifically targets students who demonstrate Margaret's combination of academic dedication and commitment to helping others. 5 years after Margaret's death, the people she helped continue to create expanding networks of positive impact throughout Cleveland and beyond. Dr. Michael Thompson has established a free clinic that provides medical care for uninsured residents, directly inspired by Margaret's example of using professional success to help others. The clinic has treated over 3,000 patients who couldn't afford healthcare elsewhere. Sarah Martinez has become a prominent advocate for legal aid services, providing free legal assistance to low-income families facing eviction, custody issues, and other legal challenges that might otherwise prevent them from achieving stability. James Patterson's construction company has built affordable housing units for dozens of families, with James personally covering down payments for qualified buyers who lack sufficient savings for homeownership. Every person Margaret helped has become a multiplier of her impact, observed Dr. Williams. She didn't just change individual lives, she created a culture of giving that continues to expand through everyone she touched. Margaret's case has been studied by researchers interested in understanding the psychology and methodology of effective long-term philanthropy and community service. Dr. Robert Chen at Case Western Reserve University documented Margaret's systematic approach to helping others and found that her methods aligned with best practices in sustainable community development and individual empowerment. Margaret intuitively understood principles that professional philanthropists and social workers spend years learning, Dr. Chin concluded. She focused on addressing root causes rather than symptoms, invested in people's long-term potential rather than just providing temporary relief, and created accountability systems that encouraged recipients to pay forward the help they received. Research inspired by Margaret's example has influenced policy discussions about individual philanthropy, community support networks, and the role of private citizens in addressing systemic poverty and social challenges. The Margaret Walsh Foundation has grown into one of Cleveland's most effective community support organizations, providing assistance to over 500 individuals and families each year using Margaret's systematic approach to identifying and helping people who can benefit most from strategic investment. We try to ask the same questions Margaret asked, explained Foundation Director Lisa Rodriguez. Not just who needs help, but who has the motivation and potential to transform help into lasting positive change for themselves and their communities? The foundation has funded educational programs for over 200 students, business startup assistance for 47 entrepreneurs, and emergency support for hundreds of families facing temporary financial crises. One aspect of Margaret's story that continues to intrigue investigators is how she identified so many people who needed help and developed such an extensive network of community connections while maintaining complete anonymity. Margaret somehow knew about people's private struggles and financial hardships without ever revealing how she learned about their situations, Patricia Chin observed. She had access to information about community needs that most social service professionals would envy, but she never explained how she developed these connections. Investigation suggests that Margaret had spent decades quietly building relationships with people throughout Cleveland's helping professions: teachers, social workers, clergy, medical professionals, and community leaders, who came to trust her commitment to helping others and regularly referred people to her for assistance. Margaret's story has personally inspired thousands of people to reconsider their own approaches to helping others and community service. Margaret showed me that you don't need wealth or position or recognition to transform lives, said Jennifer Martinez, one of Margaret's former colleagues who now volunteers regularly with community organizations. You just need to care about other people and be willing to sacrifice for their welfare. The Margaret Walsh Volunteer Corps, established by people inspired by her example, now includes over 300 Cleveland residents who provide anonymous assistance to community members facing financial hardships. Today, Margaret Walsh's cubicle at Midwest Insurance Company has been converted into a memorial space where employees can reflect on her example of quiet service and extraordinary impact. A simple plaque reads, Margaret Rose Walsh, 1955 to 2019. She proved that the greatest lives are often the quietest ones. Margaret's story has become a permanent part of Cleveland's identity, inspiring residents to recognize that extraordinary service to others doesn't require public recognition or official positions. It requires only dedication to seeing people in need and willingness to sacrifice for their welfare. Margaret lived the ultimate example of servant leadership, reflected CO Martinez during the 5th anniversary memorial service. She had no title, no authority, no public platform, but she exercised more positive influence on our community than most people in positions of power ever achieve. The Silent Guardian's legacy continues to grow through every life changed by the Margaret Walsh Foundation, every student helped by scholarships established in her honor, and every act of anonymous kindness inspired by her example. Margaret Walsh died as quietly as she had lived, but her death revealed that she had spent 3 decades creating one of the most comprehensive private support networks Cleveland had ever seen. Her story proves that the most profound impact on the world often comes from people who work in complete obscurity, motivated not by recognition or gratitude, but by pure love for their fellow human beings. Margaret never sought credit for what she did, observed Dr. Williams. She sought results. And the results of her 30 years of service will continue benefiting Cleveland for generations to come. In a world that often equates visibility with value and publicity with importance, Margaret Walsh's story reminds us that some of the most valuable people are the ones whose names we never learn, whose faces we don't recognize, but whose actions create networks of hope and opportunity that extend far beyond their own lifetimes. The Silent Guardian was silent no more, but her legacy reminds us that there are likely other Margarets among us right now, quiet people living extraordinary lives of service, changing thousands of lives while remaining completely invisible to public attention, proving that true greatness is measured not by what we achieve for ourselves, but by what we sacrifice for others. Her story offers hope that extraordinary impact doesn't require extraordinary circumstances. It requires only an extraordinary commitment to putting other people's welfare before our own, and the patience to work quietly for decades while trusting that love expressed through action will create changes that outlast our own lives.